Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Your Bible Questions Answered. I'm your host, Dr. Douglas Hamp. Great to be with you. I want to let you guys know that if I'm not able to get to your question or you want to look for more details, I have a whole bunch of stuff on my website. You can go to douglashamp.com and pretty much everything almost everything I've ever written is on the website. All right, so you don't have to buy it. You can just read it as an article. If you want to buy it, you can do that too. That would be awesome because that will help support the ministry. So thank you for those people that are doing that. You can also go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp and you can become a patron of this ministry and give as little $2 or whatever you want to give every month. And again, thank you. A big shout out to my patrons. I really do appreciate that. I'm looking forward to getting into your questions today. As always, there's lots of good questions. If you want to be at the front of the line, you've got to get the Way Congregation app available in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. And you can get that on your phone and just put in your question into this show. You'll see it where it has a little, looks like a little messaging thing. Okay. So when you do that, then you'll be able to message your question and I'll get to the first. Otherwise, you can just put it right here in the chat. Right now, if you're watching live, you can put it in the chat right here on the show, and I will get to it at my earliest convenience, guys. So I'm really trying. All right. So fantastic. Let's get into it. There's some great questions already. Looking forward to these. So this is from Legacy. He says, the Bible says there is nothing new under the sun. Could that mean that prior to the flood, that civilization was extremely technological, such as today, or even more technologically advanced? What was pre-flood? What were pre-flood times likely to be like? All right. Well, obviously, this is going to require a fair amount of speculation, okay? Because we have little glimpses from some of the literature, so we can deduce some things, but we don't always have concrete proof, okay? So I'm going to take what I have from scripture, I'm going to deduce some things, and that's where we'll end up, okay? Now, I want to point out that there was something, a ancient Greek hand-powered type of computer, all right? It's called the Antikythera mechanism, and this thing was some kind of ancient computer, all right? And I'm going to put a video in the chat if you guys want to learn more about that. I think you guys would find that very interesting. All right. So you can look at that video there to learn more. But obviously, my whole point here is that there's a lot that has been lost. We can only imagine how much amazing, incredible ancient information and technology and knowledge was lost when the Alexandrian library burned down. I mean, that was a sad moment, right? We could only speculate what was lost right there. So also, of course, when the flood happened, I mean, imagine that you are the last person, you and your family are the last people to survive on earth, and you get everything started again, but you'd still have a lot of knowledge of what was before, but you wouldn't be able to reproduce all that. Much of it would be lost. All right. So the earth existed for roughly 2,000 years since the time of Adam, right? So from Adam until Abraham, let's say, was about 2,000 years, okay? Until Noah, maybe 15, 16, 1,700 years, again, somewhere in that general time frame. So a lot of information was lost. What do we know? Well, we know that when man began to multiply in the face of the earth, let's go to that text, right? Because that is in Genesis chapter 6, and it's really a beautiful passage because it helps us to understand a lot, okay? So Genesis 6, now it came to pass when men began to multiply in the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, or they were tovot, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And it says that there were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. All right, so that right there gives us a huge clue, is that the sons of God, these are the angels who eventually became fallen, Whether they were fallen at this state is one of those questions. I look into these kind of questions a lot in my book, Corrupting Image, Volume 2. Okay, so you can check that out. It was a lot of fun to go and to dig up some of these things. But we also know from the book of Enoch that the book of Enoch says that it was the angels who came down and gave types of ancient technology to humanity, which is also interesting because when you start to compare that with some of the Native American lore, they say that there are quote unquote aliens. Okay, I'm putting that in air quotes there for you, that are coming down and they're speaking to these medicine men or shamans or whatever term you want to use and imparting to them secret information. Now, it's anecdotal, but that's the testimony that we get from a number of different tribes. And again, I talk about that in Corrupt the Image, Volume 3. So, if those aliens or those sons of God were doing that before the flood, and presumably since they were in God's presence and they don't learn in the same way that we learn. Now, again, let me just preface that angels do learn, right? Because they don't come out all knowing and they don't know the future. They only know where they are now, but they don't have a requirement or a need to learn like a baby learns. A baby has to learn how to talk. A baby has to learn how to walk, right? A baby has to learn how to eat, in fact, right? So all of these are learned responses that take time. And then we go to school and we fill our minds with information, right? So angels don't have to do that. They come out already speaking. They're already very powerful. They have a great understanding of the world, but they are still learning the future as it unfolds in front of them. So with all of that, and we even know that the greatest of God's creations, which was Satan, he came out full of wisdom. I say he came out, but he was created, right? He didn't come out anywhere. He was created full of wisdom. So he wasn't lacking anything. So, the other angels probably weren't as smart as him, right? But they were still very smart. So they would have given their knowledge to humanity. Again, all of that was lost before the flood. Here's the next thing. Even somebody who's not too bright, given enough time, he'll learn some things, right? So, today we live to be 70, 80, maybe 100 years old, and you're going to learn some things in those years that you have. So now imagine with Adam and then all the way till Noah, people are living on average about 900 years. That's a long time to figure some things out, right? So you're going to have all this knowledge and it's just going to keep increasing over all these centuries. And then that is going to be passed down to the next generation. So it's entirely reasonable to expect that the pre-flood civilization would have had a very high level of technology, right? Just based on what we know from the lost technologies that we have today. Sometimes we're digging these up, such as in the video that I just recommended for you guys. All right, so there's that kind of stuff. But then we also have the textual evidence that people were living very long, so they would have learned a lot. And if the angels were indeed, which I believe they were, coming down and giving types of technology, what is technology? It's just, here's a way to do something, right? To accomplish a task. That's what technology is. So if they're giving them information about the world, then they would have had a very high and sophisticated level of technology. And yeah, most of that was lost. Even when we look at the ark, that was a pretty impressive boat, right? This thing is huge. I mean, it's gigantic. And to think that they did that made out of wood was quite impressive. Now, sometimes you say, oh, it was made out of wood and not steel or something. But there's kind of a movement now to build high-rise buildings out of wood. And this is thought to be a good thing instead of a bad thing, right? And we think, oh, well, skyscrapers have to be made out of steel and cement. But again, there's a movement to make them out of wood because wood is renewable, it's fairly breathable, and there's all these different benefits to using wood. All right. Now, whether you agree or don't, it doesn't really matter. But this is now some some people are really pushing for this. So, there are definitely advantages to having a wooden vessel. So anyway, yes, I think that there would have been a very high level of technology before the flood. Most of that was lost, except for whatever Noah and his sons and wife and daughters-in-law could have remembered and then passed on to the next generation. Probably a good thing, considering that the world was incredibly wicked and a lot of the things they learned were not beneficial. And so God wanted much of that knowledge to be lost. So anyway, and the follow-up question here is, what do you think about the similarities between modern day superhero movies and the Titans or Olympians? Oh, I think there's a huge similarity, right? So the mighty men of old, the men of renown, we're definitely talking about the Olympian god type mythologies, okay? And I'm putting mythologies again in air quotes because a lot of these things, while I don't believe there's a god named Zeus, I don't think there was a god named Hermes who had, magic shoes that could fly. I don't think that's quite the case. But those are basically motifs of what had come before. And again, if you want to dig deeper into this, in Corrupting the Image, Volume 2, I show how Nimrod was really the archetype of many, not all, but many of those different gods, right? He was the hero par excellence of the ancient world, the hero that became Heracles. He's, and he was, I'm trying to think of the name in Phoenician, but he was the king of the city, Melkart, right? So Melkart, that's the same guy, okay? And it all traces back to Ninurta, who was Nimrod, right? So all of these things are actually found in the Bible. If you start to decode them just a little bit, you'll find that their origin is written in the Bible and other places in the ancient Near East as well. Now, I love going to Marvel and DC Comics. I love, and just enjoying those movies. I think they're a lot of fun. But I'm always aware of what is below the surface, which is it's this kind of deification, this apotheosis of man that, hey, you can become a god, right? Maybe you'll just become a technological god, or maybe you will somehow be mingled with the gods. Remember, gods here, we don't mean sort of the biblical idea of a god, but we're talking about ancient races of beings who have evolved to a certain level that can now do superhuman type feats. That's what a god means in the modern vernacular, right? And that's what a superhero is somebody who can do things above the human experience, right? That's what it is to become a god. So I definitely think that we have a huge crossover. Now, again, as these mythologies would continue, they got further and further from the origin, and so they started to take on a life of their own to some degree. But again, we see huge similarities between them. Thank you for that great question. All right, this is from Iris. By the way, Iris, I just want to say thank you for all your questions. I really appreciate your questions. You kind of said something you're not sure if you should ask so many, but please keep asking your questions. They're great questions, by the way. Well thought out. They're obviously intelligent questions, right? And so I appreciate it. So keep them up. All right, so this is in Revelation 19:14. Who are the armies following Jesus? Because Revelation 17:14 says those with him are called chosen and faithful. So let's take a look at Revelation 17:14. That is an important passage to understand Iris's question. All right, so we have here the 10 horns that have not received a kingdom yet. They're going to receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. All right. So those who were with him, and it goes on. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, tongues, and nations. All right. So talking about the whole world, there are people who are on the side of the Lamb. They are going to, they're called, chosen, and faithful. All right. So let's take a look at the second part of this, which is Revelation 19, 14. Interesting. All right. So the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. All right. So, um, and I think part of your question has to do with you're hanging out with some pre-trib rapture people, and that's not a theory that you hold to. Okay. So I just mentioned that so we have a little bit of context of where you're coming from in this question. And you're asking another question. I'm going to just kind of throw these all together because I think they're all related. As I was looking at your questions, I think they're all kind of related. So let me just throw this in there, if you don't mind. Deuteronomy 33:2. Can you explain who the saints are here? Verse 3 also mentions saints, but I understand that as people. Both words in Hebrew are also different for saint. Zechariah 14:5. Who are the saints in this verse? It uses the same Hebrew word as Deuteronomy 33:3. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy 33:3. All right, so Deuteronomy 33. All right, so the Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints. That's interesting. From his right hand came a fiery law. Yes, he loves the people. All his saints are in your hand. They sit down at your feet. Everyone receives your words. All right, so the word saints in Hebrew and in Greek, there's really only two words that we're dealing with here. Typically, I think there may be one alternate word, but typically the word that we're talking about is the word here we have kodesh or kedushim, right? Kadoshav. These are all from the word kadosh, right? Kadosh means holy. It's somebody who is set apart. Now, someone who is set apart is not always a righteous person. We know that a temple prostitute was a kedeshah, same root, not exactly righteous, but yes, set apart. Okay, she was set apart for the purpose that she was doing, which again wasn't a good thing. So here, the word holy can refer to any being who is set apart for God's service. Could be God's service. It could be either an angel, or it could be um, a human. Okay, so let's just take a look at the word holy angels. Okay, we're going to see this here. So let me do this search here in English. Why is it? Oh, I know why. There we go. All right. So I'm going to just do that. All right. So notice here when Jesus is talking about when he comes back and all the holy angels with him. All right. So the word in Greek is hagios. Hagios and kadosh or kedushim are the exact same thing. Now we have a number of words in English. We have holy, we have saint or sanctify, right? They're all talking about the same thing. Or we could say set apart. They're all synonyms for this same idea of being set apart, right? And it doesn't prove whether they're necessarily angels or people, right? And so we have this again, Jesus talking about the Father and his holy angels. Now, why would he need to speak about holy angels? Well, because we know per Revelation chapter 12 that another reference here to holy angels in Revelation 14, but let me go to Revelation 12. We have this little battle that's happening between Michael and his angels, and with the dragon and his angels. Okay, so they're the same kind of being, but clearly on two different teams. Okay, so when Jesus or God talks about holy angels, he's talking about the ones that are on his side, right? And of course, Satan has his angels, right? So they're just messengers. That's all the word means. So we're trying to understand, exactly who we're talking about here. But we can also go to the book of Jude, because in Jude, it talks about those who came. Here we go. All right. So now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment on all. Okay. So he's talking about he's coming with his holy ones and he's going to execute judgment on the bad guys. That's what these men are the ones that are the bad guys. So who are these bad guys? That's really the question. All right. So we go back to Deuteronomy 33, right? So this is the answer. The Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand came a fiery law for them. All right. So Jesus came, or excuse me, well, God came, right? He came. When he came to Mount Sinai, did he come with raptured individuals or with people who had been resurrected at that point? We have no indication that that's the case. Rather, he came with his angels, right? He came with his holy angels. Again, that's the word saint is holy, his holy angels, right? So this is how we kind of have to figure this one out because it's not entirely spelled out for us. Now, all of that to kind of set up this scenario where we can go to Revelation chapter 19, because I know I used to be a pre-trib rapturist and I get it, right? When you start looking at Revelation 19:14, the argument is that he's coming with the armies of heaven, which is us, right? That's the whole idea, is that we are going to be following him. Now, I'm going to be a little bit slippery on this one because I would suggest, even though I'm not a pre-trib rapturist at this point, I would suggest that it's possible that Jesus is coming back with those that he has resurrected. It's entirely possible. However, based on all the language that I've seen where the armies in heaven or the armies of heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, this is very much a description of what we see of angels. All right. So I would suggest that we have that we're looking at probably angels. Now, again, we can do a quick survey and we can say, well, that they're white and clean, that suggests that they used to not be white and clean. And again, I'm not going to deny that. I think this is one of those passages where you could say, okay, that's entirely possible. But let's keep this in context. When is this happening in Revelation 19:14? When Jesus comes back with these people following him, he's coming at the end or after the tribulation, right? He's coming after the end of the tribulation, now turning into the day of the Lord when he comes to execute judgment upon the earth, right? So we've been told that we are not going to be given over to his wrath, right? We're not appointed to his wrath. And so he's also going to hide us for a time. So we're getting into some very minuscule details about the return of the Lord. I'm talking like, hours and minutes. And that's where it gets a little bit fuzzy, right? It's kind of like when you zoom into a picture, you could go in so far that it starts to pixelate. And I would suggest that as we start to get into this kind of resolution, our picture becomes a little bit pixelated because we just don't have all the details to try to understand down to the hours and minutes type of resolution. That would be pretty awesome if we had that. I don't think we have that from scripture, right? So I would suggest that when we start to zoom in that closely, we've got to just be a little bit considerate and patient and say, well, maybe. All right. So my first thing would say that this is talking about angels, right? We have, I think, very clear evidence that we have an angelic host, right? Even Jesus said when he comes, right? When he comes with his holy angels, right? The Son of Man, when he comes in his glory and in his Father's glory and of the holy angels, right? So that's pretty powerful. Jesus tells us that he's coming and he's coming with his holy angels. We see this in a number of places, right? Mark says the same thing. Whoever's ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him, the Son of Man, also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. I mean, that's pretty powerful, right? It's really hard to get around that. In Matthew 25, Jesus comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him. He will sit on the throne of his glory. And then all the nations are gathered before him, right? The good guys and the bad guys. So that's why I would suggest that if we just let these passages help us interpret Revelation 19:14, that I think Jesus has already given us the clue that he's coming with which army? The holy angels. All right. Let me show you one more passage that I believe will help to strengthen this understanding. So this is Joshua chapter 6. So they cross over, and it's what, chapter 5, isn't it? I think it's chapter 5. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So they crossed over. There we go. Chapter 5. And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" He says, "No, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." And Joshua fell on his face. Right. So this is Jesus. "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua. Right now, we know that the Lord, or Yehovah, is called the Lord of hosts, right? So that's the Lord Sevaot, right? Svaot, right? He's the Lord of armies. So throughout the entire Bible, the whole idea of these armies is not people, but it's his holy angels, which again is what Jesus said. He's coming back with his holy angels. All right, I'm going to rest on that one because I think if I say any more, I'm going to be beating a dead horse here, and I don't want to do that. All right. But I wanted to give you enough to latch onto to at least, to suggest that, the better argument, in my opinion, is that it's talking about angels. I think the weaker argument, far weaker, is that he's talking about raptured individuals in the pre-trib rapture sense of the word. Okay. I just don't think that fits very well at all. All right. Let's see here. So yeah, so I answered I think I got to all your questions. And again, Iris, I love your questions, so keep them coming, please. All right, this is from Hatal Kazal. Can you please explain why Yehovah wanted to take Moses' life in Exodus 4:24-26? Or is there something that I missed? Thank you and be blessed. All right, so let's look at Exodus 4. Okay, so this is kind of one of these things here. You're like, well, let's see, God just called him and now he's going to kill him. All right, something seems off here. And it came to pass on the way at the encampment that the Lord met Moses, and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp knife and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at Moses' feet and said, "Surely you're a husband of blood to me." So he let him go. Then she said, "You are a husband of blood because of the circumcision." Whoa, isn't that a weird one? All right, so what's going on? Well, again, look at the text here. So God comes along. He's seeking to kill Moses, and then Zipporah knows exactly what to do. Right? That tells you that there's a whole lot behind the scenes that is not being spelled out. Right? And so again, this is one of these times when we have to just, understand kind of the backstory, right? I wish he had told us exactly what the backstory is, but I think we can deduce it with a pretty good success rate. All right. So how did she know what to do? Well, that's probably why God was coming to kill Moses, is because he was supposed to circumcise his son, but he had not. And the fact that she knew what to do, and she's pretty ticked off about this, "You're a husband of blood to me," seems that she was the one that was not willing to allow this. Okay. Now keep in mind, their kids are not young at this point, right? They got married about 40 years earlier, right? So, their kids at the very least are probably close to 30 years old. That's pretty late in life to get circumcised, all right? But you can just imagine the trauma that, Zipporah's like, come here, son. What are you doing, mom? Right? I got to do this because of your dad, right? And the God that he serves, or something. I don't know, whatever she said, right? But she wasn't happy about it. That seems to be the implication, right? You're a husband of blood to me. Seems that she was not willing. And apparently Moses kind of let this slide. But look, Moses is now not going to be just a casual observer of God, but he's going to be the very one that God will use to communicate, not only to set the children of Israel free, but he's going to communicate his laws, his Torah, his ordinances, his statutes, his ways through Moses, right? So if anybody needs to be righteous and kind of do it by the book, it is Moses, right? Those in leadership are, like it or not, called to a higher level of accountability, right? We expect the same thing from our elected leaders, right? It's like, well, it's one thing if you're Joe Schmo, right? But if you're president or governor or secretary of state or whatever you may be, you're really expected. I mean, everyone's supposed to be operating on a truthful level, but we expect that even more. At least we hope so. We hope that we'll get that from our elected leaders, right? So that seems to be what's going on here, is that he had simply not circumcised his children as he was supposed to, as he knew to do, because he's a son of Abraham and he knew what had been passed down, and yet he simply did not do that. So to be part of this covenant people, the males had to be circumcised, and Moses was circumcised because his parents did it. But then with his own children, he kind of let this one slide. And so, yeah, God's meeting him like, well, maybe I can't use you, right? If you're not willing to do this thing, then how am I going to use you for these things, right? How can you be an example of my commandments if you yourself are not willing to keep the commandment, right? And Zipporah knew this. She didn't have to say, what's going on, Moses? I just don't understand. She got it exactly. She's like, oh, yeah. This thing that I've been against now is coming due. And I thought we could get away with it, but no. And that's a good reminder, right? We think that God's kind of like us and he'll forget things. And, well, he probably forgot about that thing 20 years ago. He doesn't forget. He really doesn't. And he's always just. He's always true. He's always righteous, which is a good thing, right? We sometimes wish that he weren't, but he's always good. He's always true. And he always remembers, okay? So you won't get away with anything. I guess that's the good news and the bad news, depending on how you look at it. But that's what was going on in that situation. Okay, thank you. Another question from Iris. Again, thank you, Iris. Who are the lost sheep of Israel? Those of the house of Israel or those of the house of Judah, or both? Wow. Okay, so that's really a good one. Well, so let's be clear. I want to take us over to Hosea chapter 1, because there we have a very clear distinction between the two houses. Okay, so he says, I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah. Okay, so we see very clearly here that one house is getting mercy, the other house is not getting mercy, right? And when Jesus says that he came only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, I would suggest that when he says that, he's only talking about this house of Israel right here. Who is the house of Israel? Well, namely, it is the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom. Their nickname is Ephraim. Sometimes they're called Joseph. But we're talking about those 10 tribes that continue to go away. Right now, Then he says here, yet the number of the children of Israel, so this is the sons of Israel, not the house of Israel, but the sons of Israel, shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it said to them, you're not my people. Who did God say you're not my people to? Did he say that to Judah? No, he did not. He said that to the house of Israel. There shall be said to them, you are sons of the living God. But then we see something interesting, because remember, these two houses had split. They used to be one united house, and now they're two different houses. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together and appoint for themselves one head. All right, so that's part of it. Then he goes on in chapter 2, again speaking to the house of Israel, saying, she's not my wife, I'm not her husband. And he goes through this, this sad list of all the things that she's been doing, unfortunately. And then he says that I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and justice and loving kindness and mercy. I'll betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. It shall come to pass in that day that I will answer, says the Lord. All right. And so again, he's saying all this good stuff's going to come upon her. Then I will sow her for myself in the earth, and I will have mercy on her who had not obtained mercy. Who had not obtained mercy? Well, the house of Israel. That's who. All right. So these people that God said, no mercy and lo ami, not my people, what happened to them? We are told quite clearly in this book what happened to them. So in Hosea 7:7, here the word Ephraim, again, that's a nickname for the northern kingdom of Israel. Ephraim, or the house of Israel, has mixed himself among the peoples. Ephraim is a cake unturned, right? So think of a bunch of cake batter, right? It's all just mixed together, right? So that's one thing. Then we go into chapter 8, verse 8, and it says that Israel, speaking of the house of Israel, is swallowed up. They are among the Gentiles, like a vessel in which is no pleasure. So where did Israel go? They're among the Gentiles. That seems pretty clear to me. Okay. Another incredible passage is in 2 Kings 17. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, that's the northern kingdom, and carried Israel, northern kingdom, away to Assyria, and placed them in Hala and by the Habor, the river of Gosan, etc., etc. Okay, for so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt. They did all this bad stuff, sadly, and they set up these sacred pillars and wooded images. Then they burned incense, and they killed their kids, and all this lousy stuff that they did. All right, they rejected his statutes and his covenant. They did all this bad stuff, so they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, made themselves a molded image and 2 calves, right? And this is exactly what Jeroboam did. He set up a golden calf in Beit El and also in Tel Dan. Okay, so at either end of his kingdom is where he set up these lousy things, right? And he says that they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire. And so the Lord was very angry with Israel, house of Israel, and removed them from his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah alone, right? So again, this shows you the distinction between the house of Israel, the house of Judah. Where did the house of Israel go? Into the Gentiles, into the nations. And what happened to them there? They were swallowed up. They were swallowed up. What happens when you swallow something? Well, ultimately it becomes part of you, right? That's why we eat, so that it will give us energy, and we take that food and digest it, and it ultimately becomes part of us. So if Israel is swallowed up by the Gentiles, then they are part of the Gentiles. Now, here is the amazing answer that Paul gives us in Ephesians. Therefore, remember that you, once Gentiles, what is a Gentile? Someone who is of the nations, right? At that time, you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, right? So if you're part of the nations, you're not part of the nation of Israel. That makes pretty good sense, right? I hope so. So either you're part of the nation of Israel or you're not part of the nation of Israel. So Paul's talking to Gentiles, people of the nations, saying you were not part of Israel, but now you are part of Israel, right? So You were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. So the people who were far off, where do we find that phrase? We find it in Daniel chapter 9, looking at verse 7. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face, as it is this day to the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and all Israel. Notice here, those near and those far off, and all the countries to which you've driven them. Right? So he's talking about both houses of Israel and Judah. Okay. So to those far off, that's exactly what Paul says to those who were far, you were once far off. Right? He's talking to who? Gentiles who were far off. Why? Because they were originally part of the house of Israel, and then they became mingled with, mixed up, swallowed by, assimilated into the Gentiles. And so that they were not a people. What happens if you're not a people? Well, you're not a people, right? You're not distinct. There's nothing separating you, certainly on a national level or a legal level. You're just part of the nations, right? You're just French, or you're American, or you're German, or whatever. You're not anything. And, that's what there was. It doesn't mean that there's nothing genetically there. Perhaps there was, but legally, nationally, there was nothing there. And so now he's brought them back. Whoever is a Gentile who wants to come back in can come in through Yeshua. So he now makes a way to be part of the commonwealth of Israel. And he's going to put the two back together. For he himself is our peace. So who's Paul contrasting? Us, the first two who were to believe, the Jews, and you, the Gentiles, the nations. And he's now made both of us one, right? He's our peace, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation. All right. So he's taking house of Israel, house of Judah, putting them back together through the blood of Christ. That is what is so amazing. So I know that's kind of a roundabout way to get there, but I wanted to just take a moment and try to answer that as completely as possible. All right, this is from Chad. He asks, so if Satan basically swindled us in the garden, he's read my book, Crypt Image too, and took over earth to the point he could even offer it to Jesus for the cross, basically it was kind of a legal battle, like you put it. Where does that leave us after the cross? All right, Chad, you're on the right track. Here's the deal. When God took the nation of Israel out of Egypt, and they were then met by King Balak and Balaam, right? Bilam. What did Balaam try to do? He tried to curse them. But guess what? He couldn't. Why? Because they were blessed. They were blessed, right? So this is kind of the same basic idea, right? What happened with Egypt was sort of on a microcosm. What happened at the cross was a macrocosm, if you will. So Satan and Balaam and Balak were trying to curse the children of Israel, but they couldn't do it. So what they had to do was to then get Israel to open up their gates, just like the gates of Troy, and let in the Trojan horse. So that's been a pretty effective method, is to get God's people to allow themselves to be cursed because they give in to whatever temptation, right? And that's where the Moabite women came in, and they led Israel astray by seducing the men, right? And it worked. And God didn't necessarily blame the Moabites. I mean, they had their issues, but it said that God then, his wrath was against Israel because of what they were doing. Now, here's where it really is interesting, is in that same idea, we then find in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, where he's talking about those who have done the same thing. We have the Nicolaitans. Let me just get to the almost there we go. Okay, but I have a few things against you, right? Talking here to the church of Pergamos, because you have those those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality, right? And guess what? Jesus is not happy about this. Thus, you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Repent, or else I will come to you quickly, and I will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. All right, so the strategy that Satan has had, pretty clever, is okay. God's people are untouchable, right? They're now blessed. And the legal authority that Satan once held, he lost at the cross. So he can't use that same tactic. But what he can do and has been doing very effectively is to get us, the church at large, to say, okay, I'm going to give in to temptation. I'm going to give in to these things I shouldn't do. And when I do that, I'm opening the doors of my own heart, my doors of Troy, and letting in the Trojan horse. And then I can be beaten from within, right? So there's no longer an attack from without, per se, but it's now an attack from within. And that's the genius of Satan's attack. It's a lousy genius, but clever nevertheless, right? So that is, I believe, the essence of your question. And okay. All right. Next question. This is from Sean. Are the 24 elders in Revelation 4:10 the same that are in Matthew 25, 52, and 53? If not, is there any insight as to who they are? So let's take a look at Matthew 27, 52. And it is interesting, right? So when Jesus dies, the veil of the temple is torn in two, graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into this holy city and appeared to many. All right. So many bodies. Could that be 24? Sure. That would be quite a few. But it could also be 100. It could be even more, right? We just don't know. It's one of those details that it's kind of like, yeah, that's interesting. But we can't really say who it is. And I think it's rather risky to suggest that the 24 elders are necessarily the ones that were resurrected. Is it impossible? I don't think it's impossible. But I don't see any other branches kind of connecting those two things together. So, and it would only suggest that 24 were raised when it could have been more. So I don't know that we have a really clear insight. It is interesting that David set up 24 orders of priests. So that's interesting, right? Of course, we have 12 plus 12, right? 12 sons of Jacob, 12 apostles. That seems very interesting as well. So maybe it's the 12 disciples plus the 12 sons of Jacob. Maybe. Could it be 12 Levitical priests? Maybe. I just don't know that we can really settle on any one thing because, unfortunately, the book of Revelation doesn't give us enough of a clue to be able to say this is who it is. Right. So I think any one of those theories, and there may be more that seem plausible, and maybe, they're plausible, right? But I don't know that we have a slam dunk to really decide who they are. All right. Let me, let's see. Okay, and want to make sure I get to all the questions here. Here's a question. Oh, sorry, I missed one. I'll be right back. All right. Do you think this would be a roadmap for us? I'm not following the context. Okay. So the previous question, 42 generations from Adam to Jesus, the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy. The scriptures, they testify of Jesus. Do you think this is a roadmap for us? Ruger 12, I'm not sure I understand the question properly. So I apologize. If you want to maybe ask that again sometime, then maybe you can help me understand what you're really getting at. I'm not quite sure how 42 generations would be a roadmap for us. Sorry. Okay. This is from LDD Cobalts. Can you give more insight into Egypt, my people, Assyria, the work of my hand, and Jerusalem, my inheritance? Yeah, so I think you're talking about Isaiah chapter 19, if my memory serves me correctly. So this here, right. Um, well, this is talking about the age to come, the millennium, right? So then the Lord will be known in Egypt. The Egyptians will know the Lord in that day. Isn't that great? And will make sacrifice and offering. Yes, they will make a vow to the Lord and perform it. And the Lord will strike Egypt. He will strike and heal it. They will return to the Lord, and he will be entreated by them and heal them. In that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian will come into Egypt, the Egyptian to Assyria, and the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. In that day, Israel will be one of three, with Egypt and Assyria a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Well, it really is kind of simple, is that God desires that everyone should come to the knowledge of the truth and have the gift of salvation, right? So, yeah, he had to kind of spank Egypt, and he had to spank Assyria, and even had to spank Israel, if you remember, right? They all kind of went wayward, and Israel was no better than Egypt or Syria. So they had their problems. In fact, in the book of Revelation, Jerusalem is even likened to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So that's not good. So God wants everybody everywhere to come to a place of salvation. And that even includes the Egyptians and the Assyrians and even other people that were of people groups that were formerly against him. He's going to do a redeeming work in them so that they, on a national level at least, can come and be part of this. Because we know that during the time of the millennium, right, all the nations are going to come up to him. There will be individuals who fall off, yes, but on a grand national level, all the nations will come up before the Lord, and they will learn of the Lord and of his ways. So that's going to be a pretty exciting time. But the context of that is in the millennium. Okay. All right. Very good. Let's see here. This is one. Nano Glitch says, where did Lot's daughters get the alcohol? Well, so they went to a city, right? So let's take a look there at Genesis chapter 12. All right, so Genesis chapter, not 12, but 19, sorry. All right, so here we are. You got to get out of the city. You got to get out of here, and don't look behind you, right? So now Lot is he's getting out of town for sure. He lingered, right? The men took hold of his hand and they got him outside the city. Right. So it came to pass when they brought them outside that he said, Escape for your life, do not look behind you or stay anywhere in the plain, escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Then Lot said to them, No, please no, my lords. Indeed, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said to them, See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, and that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was Zoar. All right, so Zoar makes it. Zoar is not destroyed, though he was going to destroy it. Right? God was going to destroy that as well. But Zoar is not destroyed. So when they go there, they have lodging, they have food, they have alcohol. All right, so where did the alcohol come from? The city of Zoar. That's good. I love it. All right. Well, fantastic, guys. I love your questions as always. Thank you for coming and giving such good questions. That makes this show a lot more fun when I have some amazing questions. So thank you. Keep them up. I'm here every Tuesday, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions. Every so often, I'm going to kind of throw in just an awakening report while I'll interview somebody. But next week, I still will be taking your questions. So make sure to put those in the app. And again, if you want to support this, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp, and you can give as little or as much as you want. Thank you so much for doing that. It is a huge blessing. God bless.